Good afternoon, everybody.
Hello.
We'll get started in just 2 moments. We're just waiting for everybody to log on.
Wissam, you have your hand raised. What's the capability for questions? Wissam, if you don't mind, you can just pose your question in the chat.
Okay, Jess, we can get started now.
Okay, great. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So for those of you who do not know us, we are Detail Roofing and Sheet Metal. We're a service-based roofing company who specializes in leak investigations, preventative maintenance, and localized repairs on all roofing types. We service a large region of Southern Ontario and operate in the Lower Mainland of BC as design roofing as well. My name is Jessica Campbell. I'm an account manager with Detail Roofing, and I will be moderating today's session. I'm joined by Michelle Wallace, our business development manager, as well as Kelly McDonald, our client engagements and events coordinator, who will be delivering today's presentation. Before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items to go through. So for this session, it's being recorded and will be made available on YouTube before the end of the week. The session is valid for 1 CPE credit and will be available for you to report through CMRAO portal by tomorrow. And for verification of your involvement today, we will be sending the CMRAO the attendee list from Zoom. We will not be issuing a certificate, so it will all be through the portal. And you can use the Q&A function throughout the presentation if you have any questions. And we'll get to as many as we can within the allotted time. And if not, we'll get to you directly after the presentation. I'm going to turn this over to Kelly now to start our presentation.
Thank you, Jessica. And as Jessica mentioned, thank you everybody for taking the time to join us for today's presentation. So based on the weather that we're experiencing today, it's very mild, unseasonable for this time of year. So it's not likely that on a day like today, anybody is experiencing ice damming, but it is always a very popular topic, especially this time of year, and it is an issue that is specific to the winter months. It's likely the biggest issue that we encounter related to roofing in the winter months. We also see an uptick of leaks related to condensation in the winter months. So as the title suggests, that's what we're diving into today is ice damming and condensation, and also taking a look at how ventilation relates to these issues and if there's anything that can be done to avoid these issues and mitigate them from happening in the first place. So when it comes to ventilation, what can poorly ventilated spaces lead to? Well, as the title suggests, ice damming and condensation can be attributed to inadequate ventilation. Through these two issues, you can also see mold growth occurring, interior leaks, voided shingle manufacturer warranties, and higher energy bills for residents. So especially with sloped roofs, whether there's shingles or another roof system in place, the attic is really important when it comes to ventilation and issues like ice damming and condensation. So especially in our climate, attics aren't accessed very often, or at least with people that we talk to. So I can see how they can kind of be out of sight, out of mind, but they do serve a very important purpose. Some of the key aspects of the attic do include helping to regulate temperatures within the home, keeping the conditioned space conditioned. Also, in our climate, again, with the cold winter months, it helps to vent interior, warm, moist air out of the home and out of the roof surface. Also, it helps to maintain cooler roof temperatures. So looking at what a normal, well-functioning attic should look like, a few key elements. Number one, you want to have a vapor barrier and insulation evenly distributed throughout the space to, again, keep any interior heat inside the occupied parts of the home. As far as ventilation goes, you want to have at the lower end of the roof surface intake vents or soffits to allow cool air to come into the attic and then move through and out through the top surface or the air outtake vents. So again, low venting for air intake and then vents on the upper and the high slope for air outtake. Neither of these vents should be connected to anything. It's strictly for airflow. Also, venting that's very important would be any interior connections to bathrooms, kitchen fans, laundry rooms. Any exhaust venting should be going up straight through the roof surface and venting outside of the home. So throughout the presentation, we are going to be taking a look at actual real-life examples in different attic spaces of when things are not functioning as intended and how that can lead to various issues. But first, what do these attics have to do with ice damming, and what is ice damming? So ice damming is snow that melts and refreezes along the edge of the roof surface. And when it does this, it creates a dam, which then traps water behind it. Oftentimes with ice damming, we also see the presence of long icicles hanging from the gutters. So does this mean that anytime there's snowfall, there's an opportunity for ice damming to happen? Not necessarily. In just a second, we'll take a look at what the exact recipe for ice damming is. But in the meantime, we're going to take a look at our first poll.
So have you experienced ice damming this season? We'll leave this poll up for a few minutes if you want to respond, or a few moments.
Yeah, so this season, whether it's the beginning of this year or end of 2023, but in this winter season. Okay, if we want to share those results with everyone.
We're just going to end the poll now. Okay, so have you experienced ice damming this season? We have 19% saying yes, and 78% of respondents saying no. 3% are unsure.
Okay, so not surprising that a lot of people have not seen any ice damming this year. I know we have people attending today from all over Ontario. So depending on what region you're in, you might have experienced more snowfall than other regions. Okay.
Kevin, I see you have your hand raised if you want to pose your question in the chat, or we can get back to you at the Q&A period.
So for ice damming to occur, we need three things. Starts off with snow that falls and accumulates. So if we're just getting a dusting of snow, not likely that you're going to see any ice damming there. The second aspect is the snow melts, trickling down the slope of the roof surface. And then if there are sub-zero temperatures following the snow accumulation, that is where it refreezes, often along the edge of the roof surface or the gutters. So related to the second part here, the snow melting, this is commonly attributed to, This is commonly attributed to heat loss within the home and deficiencies within the attic. So if there are deficiencies in the attic making the space too warm, and again, going back to what some of those purposes of the attic space are, including regulating the roof temperatures. If it's too warm and you have the heat rising to the top surface, then the snow melts along the edge, freezing along the bottom if there are sub-zero temperatures following the snow accumulation. This lower edge of the roof surface, where the soffits are and where the gutter system is, these areas aren't receiving any heat from the interior space, which is why that is where it would tend to have the ice buildup and potential for icicles. So if ice damming is occurring, what's the harm in it? First and foremost, I think especially for managers, board members, residents, if you are experiencing ice damming, the first thought is, of course, going to be the possibility of icicles or large chunks of ice falling from the building. For the people that are living with this, it does pose a huge threat, and then liability for management or boards if something is not done about it. As far as the actual roof system or the gutters, it can cause damages to each of those areas as well. And on the next slide, we will look at an example of that. But there's also potential for things like mold growth or interior leaks related to ice damming. So some of the common issues that we see, again, if there is large chunks of ice or icicles built up along the gutter system, there is potential for the actual gutters themselves to become detached or damaged because of the weight. Another thing that we see very often are damages to the lower shingles at the roof's edge, whether it's from the ice causing damages to the top surface, or something we see more often is the water backing up under the bottom layer of shingles, like it did in this example here. So these two photos are from the same roof surface. And as you can see here, this was a newly replaced roof. If you were just taking a look at it, it looked to be in great condition, didn't seem to be any problems with it. However, when the ice damming was occurring, it was backing up at the bottom edge there and causing an interior leak. Something to keep in mind, especially with new roof installations, is that you should always be getting 2 warranties. So the first warranty would be from the installing contractor that's going to cover any issues with installation or workmanship. The second warranty would be from the actual shingle manufacturer in the case that there are any defects with the actual materials and products used. In a case like this, every shingle manufacturer warranty that I have ever read, and I've gone through a lot of them, explicitly state that any defects caused by ice damming or ventilation issues are not covered by the warranty. So just something to keep in mind. And before we go along, we have a second poll that we're going to be launching here.
Okay, so does the absence of ice damming mean your attic is well functioning and free of issues? And we'll leave this
Well, let's
up
see what
here
everybody says.
for more moments. We're getting lots of responses. Thank you. All right, it looks like our response rate is slowing down a little bit. Okay, let me end the poll now.
And then if you can just share the results also, Jessica.
Perfect. So does the absence of ice damming mean your attic is well functioning and free of issues? With yes, we have 19%, no 64%, and unsure is 19%.
Oh, well, the first 19% got it right. Sorry, this is the second one.
Yeah.
I read that wrong, Jessica. Sorry, that was my apologies.
That's all right. So no, absence of ice damming does not necessarily mean that your attic is well functioning and free of issues. You're still going to want to identify the root cause of your attic issues.
Yeah, so as we pointed out a second ago, there are some issues that come to mind right away when ice damming is occurring or when you're thinking of it ice damming. But it is important to keep in mind that, especially because attics are spaces that are not regularly accessed for any sort of reason, there can be problems like mold growth or even wood rot that can affect the structural integrity of the roof surface that can be occurring whether or not you do see ice damming. For this reason, if you do have ice damming occurring, we understand the importance of having the icicles removed and removing any hazards that may be in place. But it's also important to identify the root of the issue, which we often say would start with an attic inspection and identifying any deficiencies in the attic space. I think we have our final poll here also.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, one sec. There we go. Sorry about that. So what steps should you take if you are experiencing ice damming? Okay, great. Thank you all for your participation. I see a couple more answers coming in, so I'll just give one sec. Okay, I'm going to end the poll now. And I'll share those. So what steps should you take if you're experiencing ice damming? 1% says leave it, it will melt soon. 25% of you say remove the ice, and 89% investigate the cause.
And in this case, we did do multiple choice because we do understand the importance of investigating the issue, but also wanting to have the ice removed so that it's not going to pose any threats. So when it comes to identifying the root cause, again, we do recommend investigating the attic, and there are a long list of things to investigate just to make sure that all of the different elements of the attic are working together to promote adequate airflow and that everything is in place and functioning well. So as you can see, there's a long list of things to identify here, and we're going to be going through excuse me, examples of each of them. Michelle, what would you say of the list of things here, or just things to identify in the attic, would be the most important thing to look at?
I wouldn't say one of them is more important than the other. I think they're all equally important. The attic is a very complicated space, and it's almost like its own ecosystem that balances off each other. So all of those elements are needed in order for it to function properly. You need proper amount of air intake, proper amount of air outtake. You need vapor barriers to protect and seal. Every single one of those is very important, because if one of those is off, then the ecosystem will not work.
Okay, so now looking at and keeping in mind that diagram that we looked at of a well-functioning normal attic, if something is off and systems are disrupted, this is what it may look like. So one of the common issues that we see are when the soffits or air intake vents are blocked. So there's a few different reasons why this can occur. One of the things that I'd say we see most commonly is that if the insulation, especially if it's blown-in insulation, is blown right to the edge of the roof surface, and blocking the soffits and the amount of air that's getting in. From time to time, we also have seen this where there are perforated soffits in place, but if you remove that soffit and look behind, there's plywood in place. Or we've seen situations where the style of soffit isn't perforated all the way through, so it's just not allowing enough of that cool air to enter the attic and displace any hot, warm air that's in place there. This is likely the most common issue that we see in attics, and we see it in a lot of different ways. And that would be specific issues with the exhaust vent connections. So again, these exhaust vents are connected to places like bathrooms, kitchens, laundry rooms, areas where you want to have the fans on so that you're not creating any condensation from a hot shower or cooking or anything like that. So you don't want that built up inside a bathroom or a kitchen. You also don't want it built up in the attic. So if we have issues with these vent connections, then what we see is that hot, moist air just pumping straight into the attic space. So again, we see it in a lot of different ways. Some of the things we see most commonly are situations like this where it's become detached for whatever reason. We see cases where It just wasn't installed properly in the first place. So in a case like this, it's not good enough to be close to the roof surface. It has to be properly connected and venting out through the top of the roof. Otherwise, you're going to get air leakage into the attic space. Similar issue with the exhaust vents. Again, if they're not connected properly, that could be because they're not connected to compatible roof vents on the roof surface. For the air outtake vents especially, there are a few different types of vents. However, with the exhaust vents, it does have an interior connection to make sure that it is adequately sealed and you're not getting any of that air leakage. With any type of air outtake vent, it doesn't have that connection. So it's going to be like you see here, where even though it is right up to the plywood roof deck, there is area for air to escape and pump into the attic. So in these two photos here, we have an example. This is one of the ones that we see most commonly on sloped roof surfaces, an AF50 air outtake vent. And then this would be the example of a stem vent or exhaust vent. This is something that we don't see very often, but we have seen before, and it's just too crazy not to include. So in this case, there was an active exhaust vent that was connected to the roof surface, but not connected to any sort of vent, and there was just plastic right over top of it. And then there was an opening nearby that was not in use. So again, just that hot air didn't have an area to escape out of the top of the roof surface. You can see there's quite excessive staining happening through there. Some other issues in this attic as well due to improper installation. When it comes to the air outtake vents, as we were just looking at, again, you want to make sure that they aren't connected to anything. Their purpose is just to make sure that there's space for any hot air in the attic to move out the top of the roof surface. The minimum requirement is that there should be 1 square foot of outtake ventilation per 300 square feet of attic space. It's also very important, not only do you want to make sure that this isn't connected to anything like an exhaust vent, but you want to make sure that they are unobstructed and clear from anything, including roof joists. So in these cases here, it may not seem like a big deal because it's not covering it completely. But even in these cases where you have something blocking that space, it is impacting how much air can get out of that opening. So any areas where there is a joist in place or any other roofing element that may be obstructing it, you want to make sure that it is clear. Something that we see less often, but from time to time, are issues with the existing insulation. So that would be if it is extremely damaged, especially if there is a large leak issue occurring, or if it has become displaced or just wasn't installed in a particular area to begin with. As far as, especially in a case like this, how does it get so displaced? Often in times like this, it could be because of pest infiltration and pest issues, or again, it just could be because of an error with the initial install. But the insulation and vapor barrier, again, it's very important to make sure that it is evenly and adequately distributed throughout the space so that you are keeping interior heat inside the home. So as far as coming to a solution, unfortunately, there's not a one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to ice damming or other attic deficiencies. It is going to be unique and dependent on the specific issues that are occurring in the particular attic space. There are some times where if there is a complex-wide ice damming issue or an attic issue that is present throughout, then there may be a similar solution for the entire complex. But just because you manage one site that had an ice damming issue and certain corrections were put in place and solved the issue, doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to work for another site. Michelle, looking at some of the deficiencies that we looked at and some of the items to look for. There are checklists that we can go through when we're going through the attic. Would you recommend having a homeowner take a checklist and go through the attic to identify any potential deficiencies?
No, I would not. The attics are full of hazards, and unless you're properly trained on navigating your way through there, there's water mains, there's various other pipes, stuff like that. I would not recommend a homeowner doing that themselves. I would recommend hiring a contractor that specializes in attic ventilations. Make sure you ask them specifically if they understand attic ventilation systems and maybe ask for a bit more background information because not everybody is knowledgeable in how attics work.
So looking at some of the potential solutions, there's sometimes that during an attic inspection, there might be small little corrections that can take place in the time of the inspection that might help to fix the issue. Other times there might be larger repairs that are required. So again, even though solutions aren't going to be one size fits all, we can look at some of the potential options that may be required. So one of the things is with the air outtake vents. So if there's a case where the existing outtake vents are obstructed, or if there's just not enough to adequately ventilate the space, again, anytime that there is the minimum requirement, we usually do see the minimum requirement in place. However, I'm sure you know if there is a minimum requirement, it's very rare that people are doing more than that. So sometimes there just might be more outtake vents that are required to adequately ventilate the space. When it comes to the air intake vents, especially in situations where the existing insulation is blown right to the edge of the attic space and is blocking the soffits, one of the options to help promote more outside air being able to get in would be to install baffles. So this just acts as a channel for air to pass through in the event that there is insulation blocking the airflow. In some cases, we actually see baffles that are already built into the space, so they can be made of wood and part of the structure. And if they're not, then there are these foam baffles like we see here that can be easily installed, usually in the time of the inspection, just to allow more of that outside air to get into the attic space. As we see here, we don't come across this very often, but it is important to ensure that if you do have baffles in place, that there isn't insulation or any other items that are getting into the baffles, as that is going to defeat the purpose and you're not going to get that airflow coming through that channel. So one of the options also, if there is an improper event that is currently installed, or if the current vent is not working for whatever reason, then it may be an option to change the existing style of vent. So we have here 4 different examples of slope troop outtake vent options. Again, what we see most often is the AF50 box vent. We do have ridge vents, which we're seeing more and more often these days, the turbine vents and the box vents. As far as what type is the best one or which one is better than the other, no real recommendation there. It's just you want to make sure that whatever outtake ventilation is in place is just going to be adequate for the space and working with the other systems to make sure that any heat within the attic is getting out of the attic space. In cases where the insulation or vapor barrier has become severely damaged or has been displaced or is missing from certain areas, then in that case, we might recommend installing new vapor barrier insulation, topping it up if needed, or replacing any damaged areas. So again, especially if there have been cases where there's pest infiltration or any damages like that, or if the pests have been living in there and there's any concerns about harms from them being in the space, replacing or renewing some of the vapor barrier insulation may be a step that can be taken. So in just a second, we're going to take some of the questions that we've received that are specifically related to ice damming. But before doing that, we're going to go over some of the common questions that we've received over the years. So the first one, will clearing the gutters prevent ice damming? The presence of gutter debris is not going to directly impact whether or not ice damming occurs. Removing debris from the gutters is a great thing to do, especially heading into the winter months. But that would just be to ensure that any drainage is going to drain adequately to the downspouts, and you're not going to have any issues with blockages or the leaves in there freezing. But any buildup of debris or foliage in the gutter system is not going to directly cause ice damming. As far as solutions for ice damming, I feel like this is one of the things that we get most commonly is about heat trace cables. And this is what a lot of people that we talk to tend to think is the one size fits all solution that is going to fix or solve any ice damming issues. When it comes to heat trace cables, they can be a useful tool to help mitigate any issues, especially the presence of large icicles forming. However, we would still recommend investigating the root of the issue. There are times where there might not be a formal attic space or crawl space or large enough area to access to be able to mitigate any interior issues that are occurring. So sometimes heat trace cables are the most viable option to prevent the presence of ice damming. One thing that we would say is if you do have heat trace cables, there are a number of different types on the market. You can go pick up heat trace cables from Home Depot or get them from places that specialize in that type of cable, which would require an electrician, making sure that they are connected properly. And it is something that you want to be inspecting regularly and maintaining regularly just to make sure that they are functioning as intended and not posing any hazards. As far as removing the icicles, how should they be removed? We do recommend having them safely removed and by a professional. It's very important to make sure that in the removal process, you're not going to cause any damage to the roof surface or to the gutter system by removing the ice. And you also want to make sure that you're not just standing underneath it, knocking it down, as that can cause harm in the actual removal process as well. Can ice damming occur on flat roofs? Although we do tend to see it more commonly on sloped roof surfaces because it allows the water to trickle down the slope of the roof surface, we do see ice damming on flat roofs as well. Contributing factors would be the same, and the recipe for ice damming would be the same. Sometimes in these cases, it can be a little harder to investigate, again, if there's no attic or crawl space, but especially in the cases of townhomes that do have some sort of area between the roof surface and the interior ceiling, there are items to investigate and be able to identify issues related to flat roof ice damming. So Jess, if we want to take a couple questions before moving on to the next part.
Yeah, okay. We have a lot of questions coming in, so I'll just pick a couple. So the picture you showed has a very long piece of ice. Is this because of the design of the roof?
Kelly, do you want to speak to that photo?
I believe that would have been the one towards the beginning. That's the one that had the longest one. That one, I'm not sure. I don't think it would have anything to do with the design of the roof.
I'm going to guess there was a long period of cold weather that built that up. It would really just depend on the ventilation and stuff in the attic. That's what Kelly mentioned.
Another question sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm not sure about when it comes to the icicle specifically, if there would be anything that would specifically contribute to the length and size of ice that was forming.
If ice damming happens, will it just be because the gutters have not been cleaned properly? Or do you recommend a more detailed inspection? Sometimes, since the attic is a unit's issue, should the manager get involved with the attics being investigated? Sorry.
Yeah, as Kelly mentioned, cleaning the gutters doesn't alleviate ice damming. It does allow for better drainage, and it can have some ice buildup if the gutters are blocked. If you are concerned about your attic ventilation, or if you're unsure of the state of your attics, I would recommend definitely an attic inspection, because ice damming is a symptom of a problem. It's not the problem itself. So you can always, if it is owner's responsibility, the best value is that multiple units join together and then they divide the cost in between the units. So, like, for example, we would work with the property management company, provide a per unit cost, and then most often we'd bill the corporation and then they would charge back to the owners.
Mhm. I think it's also important to note that sometimes if you see icicles, it's not necessarily always related to the attic. It might just like what if the gutters are cleaned, maybe that could result in if it's just from that. But like we mentioned, a lot of the times the attic is a contributing factor, and if it's not inspected, you could let a serious issue go unnoticed, causing greater issues in the future.
So that's actually a great segue into our next point. We will have more questions definitely towards the end. We just wanted to see if there were any at this point before moving on to the next part of our presentation, which is on condensation. So as Jessica just mentioned, just because there's not ice buildup and the presence of icicles doesn't mean that there aren't any issues occurring. So oftentimes we see this time of year that there are issues in the attic related to condensation, which can also lead to things like interior leaks and mold growth. Especially in a winter like we've seen this year, we haven't really gotten a lot of heavy snowfall in most areas, and often the snowfall that we have gotten hasn't really been followed by those freezing cold days where the ice damming actually forms. So again, the poll that we did at the beginning, there were the vast majority of people haven't seen any ice damming at properties they manage or just in general this year. And that's becoming more and more common with the more mild winters that we've been experiencing. So when it comes to condensation, and I just do want to make a quick note, we did receive some questions during the registration portion related to condensation. I just did want to make it clear that the condensation issues that we are talking about today are related to roofing elements. So anything related to windows won't be addressed today. For that, we would recommend speaking to a window specialist. It's just not something that we can personally speak on. So again, especially in the winter months where it's cold outside, warm inside, we do tend to see more leaks from condensation. In 2022, we had broken down all the different leaks that we investigated and what the cause of all of the leaks were. Leaks from condensation specifically made up 4% of the overall leaks that we looked at. And that might not seem like a very big number, but again, it is specific to the winter months, so a smaller portion of the year. And a lot of the times when we see issues with condensation and leaks related to that, they do have a lot more damages related because oftentimes they're happening for a prolonged period of time before they're identified and investigated. In a lot of the cases of the leaks that we investigated in 2022, or even the ones that we've investigated this year, there was excessive condensation occurring and leaks occurring. However, there wasn't ice damming or any presence of ice buildup in the time of the investigation and the leaks. So taking a look at one of the examples, this is actually something that we investigated, I believe it was just a few weeks ago. It was early in January of this year. So in this particular case, it might be kind of hard to see depending on what size screen you have, but there was a leak occurring in the closet where the access hatch to the attic space was, and there was just a small little stain on the side of the hatch there. So we went in for an investigation. When we actually accessed the attic space, you can see that throughout all the plywood deck throughout the space was absolutely saturated, covered in water throughout. In the space, there were 3 air outtake vents. However, 2 of them were obstructed by the roof joists in place there. So again, it might not seem like a big deal, but it is impacting how much air is actually getting out of those openings. The exhaust vent that was connected to the bathroom fan, that's this guy over here. So not properly connected. It's connected to the wrong type of vent on the roof surface. So again, it doesn't have that adequate seal. So it does allow hot, moist air to just get out into the attic space. The vapor barrier and the sealing around the fan boxes was not adequately sealed. So again, air leakage happening from that area as well. And then just as far as the design went, the ducting for the bathroom vent went across the whole attic space. So where the bathroom fan was in relation to the vent on the roof was opposite ends of the attic space. So again, with flat roofs, especially again, a lot of the flat roof townhomes that we look at, even if they don't have formal attic spaces or crawl spaces, these aren't exempt from condensation issues. A lot of the condensation issues that we see in the winter aren't specifically related to sloped roofs with large attic spaces. We do encounter a lot of them with flat roofing as well. So one of the things that we see from time to time, and this can be very tricky to identify, especially before it's become an active leak in the home. This is if the vents behind the ceiling have become disconnected or weren't installed properly in the first place. So in this particular case, there was a leak occurring that we were investigating. And during the investigation process, we had cut the drywall and cut the ceiling just to see what was happening behind these spaces. In cutting the ceiling and the drywall, we did see that the insulation behind super heavy black staining happening, which was suspected mold growth. And then we did find an exhaust vent behind there that wasn't connected to anything, so just pumping hot air behind the ceiling. One of the worst cases that we saw like this, where there was air leakage from a disconnected vent behind the ceiling, was in this particular case here. So there was a condensation issue that was occurring due to this vent disconnected behind the ceiling. However, it was not detected. So it got to the point that there was actually a collapse of the ceiling in the unit, and they ended up removing the ceiling throughout the majority of the first floor, and it was stained like you see in these photos all throughout the unit. This had been occurring for likely a very long time. Huge hazard for the ceiling to be coming down like that, but also very extensive damages and remediation that were required because of this issue. So this one was something that we saw, again, a leak issue that was related to a bathroom. And this particular leak was only occurring when it was really cold outside. And again, there wasn't any active precipitation happening when the leak was occurring or in the days following. So those can sometimes be a sign of condensation issues. In this one, again, during the investigation process, there was some staining in the bathroom surface itself, some drywall separation. When we cut the ceiling here, there also was potential mold growth happening behind the ceiling. On the actual roof surface, you can see in the photos here that there is some snow built up around the side, but not throughout the roof surface. The rest of the roof surface is mainly dry, except for at this one vent here where there is some water built up. The actual vent itself does have moisture on it, whereas all the nearby vents dry, no signs of moisture. When we opened up the top of this vent, we did notice that the insulation inside completely saturated. We pulled a piece out, pipe was completely corroded, and ended up finding that below there was a disconnection here, which again, just allowing hot air to pump into this space, leading to prolonged condensation, which led to not only extensive damages with this vent in the interior connections, but also a leak into the bathroom below. So again, depending on the style of roof, there are air outtake vents that you want for flat roofs as well. So in this particular case, there were some vents in place. However, through a leak investigation, we found that it was not adequate for the size of the roof and for what was happening there. So as you can see throughout, there's different stacks all throughout here, but these would all be plumbing stacks. On the side here, there are some vents for the air outtake, but nothing else throughout. When we were doing a leak investigation, we had access into one of the units, saw some of the staining that was happening inside. And then when we were doing the investigation on the roof, when we did a cut test of the roof, there wasn't any sign of moisture between the layers of the membrane itself. When we cut down a bit further into the roof deck, we did find that on the underside of the roof deck, there was, again, a lot of staining suspected to be mold, and then excessive staining in that area between the ceiling and the roof, just really heavy staining all throughout. So in this case, it was recommended to install additional ventilation throughout the roof surface to prevent condensation issues like this from happening. And similar to sloped roofs, there are also various options of the specific type of ventilation for flat roofs. So one of the ones that we see most commonly would be a breather vent like this one. Also, the box vents, very similar style to the ones that we see on sloped roof surfaces, as well as the turbine vents. And then something that we see less commonly here, more commonly in our other location in BC, would be a doghouse vent. And then just another thing to keep in mind that there can be condensation issues in small spaces like this, like an attic or the space between the ceiling, that aren't necessarily tied to the roof. So this is something that we saw a couple of years ago that was in a crawl space. It was causing a leak into the garage area next to this crawl space, as well into one of the adjacent units. So in this case, we went into the crawl space that was up there. There was the vapor barrier and insulation throughout. Insulation was completely saturated. You can see all the water built up under the vapor barrier. And then other than this, there was no ventilation in this space. No air, no way for the air to get out. So in this case, they did end up engaging an engineer just to figure out next steps for this particular issue. So when it comes to detecting potential ventilation issues, especially if there isn't ice damming occurring, there's no foolproof way to identify these issues, but some of the tips that can be a little helpful and might be able to identify potential issues are the next two that we're going to look at. So the first tip would be completing a tissue test for any exhaust fans like those in the bathroom. So in this case, you would want to turn the fan on. Sometimes when you turn the fan on, it might sound like it's functioning because you hear it come on, it sounds like everything is good, but that's not always a sign that it is working as intended. So a tissue test, holding two pieces of tissue paper up to the vent to make sure that it is sticking like we see here. If the vent is not holding it at all, or if it's only partially holding it, again, not foolproof. It could just be a sign that it needs to be cleaned, but it could also be a sign that there are issues with the connections in the attic. So if you have this happening, it might be a good first step to start looking at the attic space. The next one is related to snowfall. So again, if we have heavy snow accumulation, but in the days following it's not freezing, or it takes a couple of days for any ice to form, one tip we would say is to observe the total snow coverage on roof surfaces in the days following the snow accumulation. If you have a complex where all of the roofs are completely covered right up to the peak with snow, and you have one that is only partially covered where the top is bare and there's snow built up at the bottom, and even if there's no ice, this can be a sign that this is an attic that needs to be investigated, because if it was the temperature outside that was causing the snow to melt, it would likely be happening uniformly across the roof surfaces. If there is a glaring difference between the snow coverage, it's very likely that it's attic deficiencies and too much heat in the attic that's causing the snow to melt, even if there's no ice in place. Okay, before we dive into the Q&A, I just want to mention here about the CPE credit and reiterate some of the stuff that was mentioned at the beginning. We did have a couple questions in the registration about logging the CPE credit. So just so everybody is aware, this will be available in the CMRAO portal by tomorrow. We do not report it for you. You have to go into the portal, report the learning activity, which is again called avoiding ice damming and excessive condensation. What we do is send the attendee listing from today over to the CMRAO so that they can verify that you did indeed attend it. Because we're sending that list over, we aren't issuing a certificate. There is a section in the portal where you can upload a proof of completion. That's not a mandatory field, so if you don't have a certificate, you don't need to upload anything. If you're on this today and you have attended, we are sending your verification to the CMRAO.
Okay, great. I guess we'll get into the question period. I do have a bunch of questions here. I do apologize if we don't get around to your question during this period. We will reply to your questions directly once the presentation concludes. So a question that we have, is it possible to add salt on the outside of the house to help prevent leaking, or sorry, rather ice damming?
I wouldn't.
I would not.
I wouldn't recommend that. If you're having ice damming issues, like the presentation talked about, ice damming is a symptom of the problem. So I do recommend, doing an inspection of the attic, because the thing is that while ice damming can cause damage on the roof, the main concern is that if you have condensation buildup in the attic and it goes for a long time, that can lead to structural issues in your building. That's very concerning. So you want to make sure that your attic's health is good and your ventilation system is in perfect condition. Otherwise, you're going to have way bigger problems than some icicles.
Also, putting salt directly on the roof surfaces can eat away at the roof membrane, which can cause expedited deterioration. So you may, trying to solve one problem, create another. What's another question we have? When should insulation be replaced when it has been affected by ice damming, i.e. water damage, repeated or otherwise?
Yeah, if your insulation is damaged, then you should replace it.
Mm-hmm. That being said, you should have a professional do that. What we see sometimes is just an overflow of insulation where people think more is better, and that's not always the case. Okay,
Yeah,
let me find another question. What would cause ice damming on a flat roof system?
that would be what Kelly mentioned, is the poor ventilation in a crawl space area or attic space. Very similar to what would be on the sloped.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Would the humidity level in the unit be affected by the attic, creating mold or the appearance of a leak? That's actually condensation.
It could be. Humidity levels are broad things, whether or not it's in a bathroom, humidity, if you're running your fans in the kitchen, how much cooking you're doing, how many people live in the house. All of those things affect the humidity levels in a unit. So it's kind of hard to tell. You have to be case by case.
It would have to be something where you get the attic inspected, because what can be happening if you are noticing that you're getting staining, it can be condensation related, it could be a leak, but until you get that inspection done and see if there's any detached ducting, you're not going to kind of be able to rule that out. Okay, we regularly block soffits for a garage that's unheated. Is this okay or no?
I wouldn't recommend that. It depends if there's vapor barrier and a bunch of other things going on in the garage, but I wouldn't recommend that. As a general rule, you wouldn't want to block the soffits. They're there for a reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the soffits are designed for allowing airflow. Okay. Sorry, I'll keep going.
I do see on here that, and I feel like we've gotten this one before, do leaf guards create a situation which can cause increased potential of ice damming?
No, they shouldn't be causing that. Leaf guards are a good tool possibly if you have a lot of foliage in your complex, but you still need to clean them. Just keep in mind that they are required to be cleaned because they do get a lot of debris buildup on the top. So that would reduce the ability for drainage if they are not clear.
Okay, what are the disadvantages of the heating?
Disadvantages is that they can be unplugged. Excuse me. Sorry, Jess. I might give you answer this one because I have seen it some more.
Oh, yeah, no worries. I think that there are some disadvantages. One is just the cost to have them installed. The other is that you're not dealing with the root of the problem. So you might be removing the ice damming by getting heat trace cables, and that is beneficial in a situation where it might be the slope of the roof or other factors that just contribute to a lot of ice damming. But if it is a situation where it is an attic related issue, you're gonna want to deal with that rather than have those installed. It kind of is a more beneficial solution, I think.
Absolutely. They required to be inspected and maintained as well. So you do require to budget to have them inspected and maintained each year because they are an electrical system.
Great. How does what we've learned so far affect a high-rise building? The roof ground is of concrete.
You can get condensation issues if your pipes aren't properly insulated in a high-rise tower.
Also, as Kelly did mention, we can see ice damming issues. I think a lot of times when you think of ice damming, you think of a townhome roof. But if there are a crawl space or other attic in a flat roof building, it's also something that could be occurring. Okay, let's see. Sorry, Kelly, how much more time do we have for questions? I just am going down the list.
About 2 minutes.
Okay, perfect. We'll get through a couple more. Let's see. Ice damming is occurring not only on the roofs, but also on the exhaust vents from high-rise mechanical rooms. Is there any recommendations for preventing these situations?
We'd have to take a look at it individually. You're welcome to email us and then we can set something up to take a look at it.
And what is the best season to carry out a high-rise roof audit?
High-rise roof audit. Really, you can do it based on the fact that most of the high rises are inverted roof systems. You can really do it any time of year because the rocks are covering the membrane. Yeah, any time of year that's not in high winds and middle of the snowstorm. Right now, nice balmy weather. Great time to get the roof checked before anything happens or there's big rainy season comes into effect. You know what's going on up there.
Jess,
and
we can take one more question.
Okay, sure. Okay, I have one about heat trace cables. Do heat trace cables pose a fire hazard if not properly maintained?
They can, yes. They are electrical system. So if they're not properly installed and properly maintained, there could be an issue. But if they are properly installed by a certified electrician and you're checking them each year, then the risk is extremely low.
Okay, great. I just wanted to address one thing because I do have a question about our free attic inspections. And just to reiterate for today's presentation, any people who are joining us, you're going to get a free one unit attic inspection with any assessments that are booked.
That's a
Okay, great.
great value. Everybody should take advantage of that.
We also, as mentioned at the beginning, this session is recorded, so we're going to get that up onto our YouTube channel. We will send out an email that does include the link to the presentation, details about reporting to the CMRAO, and then just some information on this overall attic inspection as well. If anybody does have any further questions, please feel free to contact us. Any questions that we didn't address directly in the time allotted, we will reach out to everybody individually to make sure that any questions, whether overall or specific to your building, are addressed.
Okay, great. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. It was great to kind of virtually
you.
meet some of the chat. And yeah, we look forward to working with you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.